Welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story Alaska. Today we will be tackling the next two villages on our list, Belkofski, Alaska and Bethel, Alaska. Both are in the southwest area of our state. And we'll start with Belkofski. Now, the first thing I thought of when I heard the name Belkofski was the movie I watched when I was a kid, The Hunt for the Red October, and all the Russians with their thick accents. That's just what I thought of. You always, in our American media, the Russians are the bad guys. But of course, in reality, not always the case. At any rate, Belkofski, Alaska is indeed originally a Russian settlement. It is just a blip in Alaska's history, which has now come to an end, which is actually the fascinating part about Belkofski, Alaska. It was first settled in 1823 by Russian fur traders. The village was completely abandoned then by 1980, and that is where its story ended. The remaining structures either collapsed or burned down in a 2013 fire. So I guess it sat there for, 1980 to 2013, just abandoned, and then it burned down. So that's like 33 years. Wow. Well, you could say that Belkofski is a testament of the fragility of all things in life. All things break down. The world is an entropy. Life is just a vapor. And Belkofski is sort of a testament to that. The ghostly remains today could hardly be recognized as a place where people once lived. Some old photographs of the village reveal a handful of homes and a sort of Hobbiton-like hilly landscape with a towering unnamed mountain behind it. I tried for a while to find the name of this mountain. There may be one, but I couldn't find it at least. I say towering, it was about, I think, 2,300 feet at the peak. So, not exactly Denali, but compared, just the stark rise of the mountain behind the village makes it look really epic. So you get a sense that this is an extremely remote place, and it is. And it's also kind of an unlikely location for a settlement. Like if you were going to make a settlement, this seems like an unlikely place, but its proximity to rich sea otters does make sense of this, it being founded because of the fur trade. Today, if you look on Google Earth, you only find a few scattered buildings and a spot still labeled Belkofski Cemetery, which is an ironically named spot for an abandoned village. There are a few other spots labeled, but that one was ironic and it stood out to me. There's still graves there. The story of Belkofski begins with the Aleut people off of Sanak Islands, which is a group of islands off the coast of Belkofski. They hunted for the sea otter furs on Sanak, but a declining population prompted regulations on the number of seals that were allowed to be taken. So in 1828, the people of the Sanak Islands were moved to the mainland, where they settled and became the village of Belkofski. The move was done to let the sea otter population of the Sanak Islands recover. Now, Belkofski was never a large community. It maxed out in 1880 with 268 people, according to the census. The sea otter trade was at its height at the time, and Belkofski was considered the area's most important village. So there you go. From most important to totally abandoned. My, how things change. There were reportedly 3 stores in the village, and they got their supplies from San Francisco. I thought that was interesting. Even while it was still Russia's territory, they were supplied by San Francisco, not instead of by Russia. It's interesting. Belkofski was home to a historic church called the Holy Resurrection Church, a Russian Orthodox Church. It's unclear when the church was constructed. It may have been as early as 1843, but more likely 1887, based on a mention of it in an old newspaper article. Holy Resurrection Church was unique in that it didn't have an onion dome like most Russian Orthodox churches. Rather, it featured 3 pyramidal cupolas. I'm not sure what that is, but I did see a picture of it. And you can see like 3 cylindrical type things at the top of it that kind of come to a tip rather than a dome. The unique design reflects older church buildings designs from Russia, so it was a more classy design. The church also displayed a bell tower with a working bell, which was cast in San Francisco in the 1880s. There seems to be a San Francisco Belkofski connection here. There are photographs of this building, while it was operational, and I found the building to be really beautiful. It was had a large archway in the front, and one painting I found of it showed that it had a very bright red roof, so that would make it quite a prominent and notable building in the community. I found some information about some of the priests that served there. There's a priest named Alexander Kadrovsky. I don't think that he lived there, but he visited Belkofski on occasion. I found a photograph of him with his wife and 3 kids standing in front of the church building. I tried to find more information about the Kadrovskis and learn more about their story, but I wasn't able to find much. I'm sure it's out there, but I'm limited on time coming out with the stories of villages every week. So if you know anything, I'd like to know about some of these priests. I do know that the Kadrovskis mainly lived in Unalaska and served there, but it looks like it's possible that Belkofski was a place where priests visited regularly rather than someone living there. Not really sure. There was another notable priest named Reverend Peter Petrovich Kashevarov. He was born in 1857 on Kodiak Island, which makes him one of the original non-native Alaskan-born residents. He was married with 4 children, and they moved to Belkofski in 1880. But I wasn't able to find much on him either. But I do know that he died on St. George Island. Presumably, he moved away from Belkofski as the village was being abandoned and losing its relevancy in the fur trade. And speaking of, as the sea otter fur trade dried up in the early 1900s, there was no longer a reason to stay in Belkofski. Residents made their way to surrounding villages, usually for King Cove, which is just 12 miles away by boat, or some also went to Sand Point, which is a little farther away on a nearby island. By 1970, the village had been reduced to just a few inhabitants clinging to a dying village. By 1980, the last of the residents had moved out, creating one of Alaska's several abandoned villages. Now, there's a handful of sort of ghost towns in Alaska. And for me, these ghost villages sort of stir my imagination about what their history is, what happened there, why is it abandoned. Would be cool to visit one of these. I have a, I don't want to call it a bucket list, just a want to do list to visit some of these. I don't know if I could ever make it to Belkofski. There's no airstrip there. Probably could land on the tundra somewhere, but it's just so far. Well, anyway, it really does kind of pique my curiosity. It makes me want to explore a little bit. Anyway, the church building before the village was abandoned, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places in the 1970s. But this did not stop the Orthodox Church from also abandoning the building. It just wasn't worth keeping it up if it wasn't being used. Eventually, the building collapsed and began to rot away. However, the bell from the bell tower was recovered, and it was installed in St. Herman Church in King Cove, just 12 miles away. That church was founded in 1984 as a sort of replacement for the abandoned Belkofski Church building. The bell weighs 850 pounds, so it was no small task moving this thing over to King Cove. It was moved by a team of volunteers in 2012 to its new home, thanks to a large donation by the Rasmussen Foundation, which is still operating today. I've actually looked into this before. This foundation does a lot of funding of efforts like this, and it's pretty cool. The priest of King Cove, Priest Andre Tepper is his name, Priest Andre Tepper. He said, "The bell tower is a way of bringing people together and celebrating our community's heritage. We are a people of faith. And restoring the bell shows we are serious about preserving the historical items that have been passed on to us. We want to be good stewards, and this is an important step towards protecting and preserving our heritage or inheritance, our faith. Unquote, says priest Andrei Tepper of King Cove. So I thought that was pretty cool. And that, as far as I know it, is a brief story of Belkofski, Alaska, which is no longer a populated village, just rotting buildings. All right, let's talk about Bethel, Alaska. Bethel is a large village as far as villages go. It is often called a hub village, meaning it's in a centralized location surrounded by smaller villages that can be reached by boat. The spiderweb of rivers and lakes in the region provide water roadways for many surrounding communities. So while Bethel is pretty well populated, it is surprisingly remote, being that there's no road to get there. You must fly or boat to get there. However, in the winter, you could also utilize an extensive network of snow machine trails to get to the next village. Man, every now and then I have to pause and blow my nose because there's something going around in Alaska right now. My kids have it. We've skipped church a couple of Sundays because we're all sick. And it seems like everyone is sick right now. So I will be pausing. I'll try to edit it out, but I am pausing so I can clear my nose. I'm getting all stuffy here. So you bear with me on this one. If you are in town in Bethel, this is definitely a subject switch here. Warning. If you ever go to town in Bethel, you will notice a vibrant taxi service with 93 active taxis, which is amazing for a small village. Well, not small. It's a large village, but 93 is still a lot of taxi drivers. Bethel has the highest cab drivers per capita than any other city in the United States. Now, I have actually been to Bethel many times, and I have used this cab service. Every time I've used it, my driver was a foreigner, either Albanian or South Korean, which is interesting. I found my drivers always to be very friendly. They were always on the phone with someone. They were very blunt, and they were also quick to get me to my destination in town. So if you ever use this, you can expect that. Friendly and blunt and direct, and they'll get you there, which is the way I kind of like it. Bethel sits on the Kuskokwim River, keeping the barges busy to supply Bethel and its surrounding neighbors. Bethel is home to 6,325 residents as of the 2020 census, but I found a few tidbits saying that the village has grown since then, so there's probably a little bit more. The population is pretty diverse. About 1/4 of the residents are white, 2/3 are native, and the rest are a mix of peoples. I just had to blow my nose again. Okay, well, here we go. We're going to plow through. I have actually spent quite a good amount of time flying in this area around Bethel. I spent quite a bit of time hopping around the small surrounding villages. And the whole time you have to try to avoid the busy charter planes that are constantly moving in and out of Bethel. The one I see most often is Grant Aviation. When you go there, you'll just see these red caravans. There's so many of them. They kind of flood the area. Grant is a bigger one. But there's also Ute Commuter Service, Fox Air, Renfro's Alaskan Adventure, and there's others. So if you were to visit Alaska to get someplace remote in that area, there's a very good chance you would use one of these charters out of Bethel to get there. In fact, Bethel ranks as the number 3 in total number of flights out of a single airport in the state of Alaska. It's number 3. So very, very busy place. And I know every time I fly in there, there's quite a lot of activity on the radio. Now, these charter pilots fly in this area so much that they develop their own community over the VHF airways. And I noticed this flying in the area. Over the radio, they'll have little inside jokes and kind of some funny talk. Last summer, they had this thing where they're making silly animal noises to each other, specifically cat noises. And I guess when you get bored flying all day over endless tundra, you kind of start finding ways to joke around to pass. the time. And this was the case when I was flying around there last summer. Bethel has a Class D controlled airspace, which is probably necessary because not only are there charter services flying almost all the time, but also Alaska Airlines flies in there with their 737s. Now, I've myself have landed there with a 737 on a parallel runway. There's two parallel runways, and you'll often find yourself landing parallel with another plane, sometimes even 737s, which is almost surreal to see. You're close enough to you can almost see the little heads of the passengers in the little windows, and you see this giant thing. And of course, it's going faster than me. It'll zoom past me and land. But anyway, there's a control tower there, which is needed. Now, the story of Bethel, as we know it, begins with Yupik Eskimos settling in the area, and they called the village. This is a long word, and I actually typed it out phonetically. Here it goes. The word is Mumtrekhogamute. Mumtrekhogamute. Now, I'm not sure which letter they're supposed to emphasize. In language learning, you learn where to put your emphasis, so I might not be saying it quite right. Mumtrekhogamute. The meaning of this word in Yupik means Smokehouse People. So I just love how they name these places. You know, there's probably like a fish smokehouse in the community, and it just became the name of the community. So I like how the native cultures utilize names like that. Obviously, they must have loved smoked fish, as all of us still do today. It's like candy if you've ever had smoked fish. Oh man, like smoked beef, like where they kind of like make it not beef jerky, but like jerky salmon, and it just tastes like candy. It's amazing. All right, I digress. As of 1880, there were 41 people living on the site, and it served as a trading post for the Alaska Commercial Company. Now, one thing I was interested in finding was ancient archaeological sites in the area. And so while there are some in the general area, I didn't find any information about findings on the site of Bethel, where Bethel actually sits, just some in the general area. So it's unclear if there was settlement here in the ancient past. However, we do know the village was moved to a new location at one point because of erosion of the Kuskokwim. So this is surprisingly common in Alaska, as villages are almost always positioned on large rivers that are constantly eroding their edges. Rivers are always finding new pathways as they cut through the tundra, and so villages are surprisingly commonly moved. There's quite a few villages that have moved locations, which is mind-boggling. Like, you don't think about moving a village, but that happens here relatively frequently, and Bethel's no exception. There's no question that the Moravian missionaries were the first impactful outsiders to enter the area. Now, I got to give you a little alert here. I will be going on a little bunny trail because the Moravian Church has had such a huge part of the history here. It's worth talking about the Moravian Church for just a second. The Moravian Church is something that I've heard a lot about. And if you go back to the history of the church in Alaska episodes, myself and Pastor Adam London talk about it. And Adam is actually, he was, I should say, a pastor in Bethel. He's recently left. But anyway, we talked about the Moravian Church, and I've heard so much about the Moravian Church in Alaska and how much they have impacted the state. And so I think it's worth taking a minute to talk about what is the Moravian Church. And, you know, it's not much I had heard about growing up in the Midwest. But the Moravian Church traces its origins to 1415, when a Czech priest named John Huss was burned at the stake for, quote, wanting to return the church to early Christian practices, such as performing liturgy in the local language. His protest against many practices of the Catholic Church led to his trial and death sentence in July 6, 1415. So they trace their origins to John Huss's martyrdom. In 1457, a young man named Gregory in Prague organized a community called the Unity of the Brethren. Gregory described the first Moravians as, quote, people who have decided once and for all to be guided only by the gospel, an example of our Lord Jesus Christ and his holy apostles in gentleness, humility, patience, and love for our enemies. So you kind of get the heart of the Moravian Church based on their founding. Now, by 1467, the group had established independent clergy. So they were already becoming a very independent denomination. After the Reformation, which started with the German priest Martin Luther in 1517, the unity of the brethren faced extreme counter-Reformation persecution as they committed the horrible crime, and I'm being sarcastic, of printing the Bible in people's own languages so they can read it for themselves. They went underground for 100 years because of the persecution by the Catholic Church, which even culminated in the heated Battle of White Mountain in 1620. They actually had battles. In 1722, the Moravian Church was renewed. Sometimes they use the word revitalized, under the leadership of Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. I never thought that I would have to learn how to speak with a Russian accent. It sounds so Russian. Or German? Oh, I'm so naive. Okay. Moravian missionaries began going out worldwide when the denomination was revitalized. They established a base in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and also in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. From this base came the first Moravian missionaries to Alaska. The Moravians are reputable for being the first missionaries after the Russian Orthodox Church, and for insisting on learning the host culture's language, and for taking the time for Bible translation and literacy teaching. The Moravians were known for that. I think it's another example of, while there are plenty of examples of the church suppressing native culture, this is definitely not one of them. The Moravians labored to do all things in the native languages, and they spent years studying it and learning it. All right, now the first mission in Alaska was in Bethel in 1885 under the leadership of William and Caroline Wineland and John and Edith Kilbuck. These first missionaries worked to make the Yupik the language of the Moravian Church in Bethel, emphasizing that the gospel ought to be accessible in their own heart language. Now, the Winelands left not long after arrival because of health issues, but the Kilbucks opened up a school in 1886. By 1891, the couple recognized the desperate need for a physician due to the great suffering of the people and devastating death all around them. They were unable to find someone willing to come, so the Moravian Church put out an offer to pay for someone's medical training to become a physician in return for a 7-year commitment in Bethel. There was a man named Herman Romig who had always wanted to be a physician, but he was unable to afford the training, so he took up this offer. Herman and his wife Ella arrived in Bethel in 1896, where they served as physicians, facing incredible heartache as the people they served suffered. They most likely suffered from disease brought in by outsiders, and also they noted the poor hygiene of the people. Now, when gold was discovered in 1897, the missionaries complained they had become slaves to the gold seekers, offering them food and basic needs, which is not what they were there for. I thought that was interesting that gold seekers showed up because of gold found in the Kuskokwim, and the missionaries helped them out, and they kind of whined about it a little bit. During this time, John Kilbuck committed adultery with fellow missionary Mary Mack and other native women. This led to his dismissal by the Moravian Church. In response, the native people protested the dismissal as they grew to love them and considered them the most effective missionaries. And so we see here an example of the messiness and complexities of cross-cultural missions, and when you mix in sin, it gets so messy. I can't tell you, serving in Mexico and then here in Alaska, how much I resonate with this story. Just how complex it can be and messy it can be. It's usually not as clean and as inspiring as it might be on newsletters, but there's realities that are really challenging for missionaries, and this is one of them. So John and Ella Romig, the couple who came as physicians, they ended up serving until 1903 when they left, but they came back to Alaska and they ended up having several practices throughout the state, including trying to found um, government hospitals throughout the state to improve the health needs. You can read their journals. There's a book called When the Geese Come, and you can just order this on Amazon. I do have a copy of it, but I have not had a chance to read it, just skim it over for the sake of this episode. Now, as I was researching this, I actually had to stop so I can keep this episode relatively short. Otherwise, I will just talk for hours. So I'm going to stop going down this rabbit hole. But one thing that seems clear to me is that the Moravians were absolutely dedicated missionaries, willing to make incredible sacrifices so the gospel can be made known in the Yukon Delta region. Now, I just started typing out my own thoughts here. So here they are. I think it is rare to find such dedication today. Perhaps it's because our easily accessible comforts have weakened our resolve, or perhaps it's more confounding in modern times with people's basic needs being met pretty much. And it takes away the clarity that missionaries had in the past. Today, missions is less about overcoming physical barriers, which gave a lot of clarity to what was needed to be done in the past. There's less physical needs, but maybe the mission ought to be more reinvigorating a lost sense of wonder about our world, about God's word, about what's true, about what's real. Maybe apathy is taking us over with our comforting lives. We have so much comfort. All right, enough of that. The first post office in Bethel was established in 1905. And before long, it became a trading, transportation, and distribution center in the region. Now, as I've said in other episodes, a post office is sort of the sign that the government is recognizing this as a community. The activity in this location began to draw in native people from the surrounding communities, and they settled in Bethel, and so it became a hub. Bethel is home to the Kuskokwim 300, which is a dog sled race that started in 1980 to commemorate an early mail route that kept the community connected to the outside world. I actually did read this in one of these books on the missionaries. They talked about getting mail twice a year from the lower 48. Can you imagine? Like, I can send an email or a phone call now, and I complain if it takes 5 seconds to send, and they got snail mail twice a year. Okay, anyway, the winner of the Kuskokwim 300, it's a 300-mile race, they will receive a $100,000 prize, which is the largest prize of any of the 300-mile dog sled races. There's another event in Bethel called the March. Oh, I'm going to make sure I say this right. Hang on. Let me pause it because I want to make sure I say this right. I'm pausing it. Okay, I got it. It is called the Chamai Dance Festival. It's an annual festival, which is a time of dancing and music to reinvigorate the native cultural heritage. Lots of music, lots of dancing. They do it in a gymnasium, and definitely something worth checking out. Now, I had trouble pronouncing it because the way it's spelled looks like Kamai, but it's Chamai. So it's one of those weird things. The way we use our letters in English is messed up. I learned that when I learned to speak Spanish and the indigenous language in Mexico. The way we use our letters in English just make no sense. All right, I digress. If you do like native art, there is another great thing in Bethel, which is a bi-monthly event called Saturday Market, where artisans gather to sell their crafts, including Yupik knives and woven baskets and other crafts. So that's pretty cool. Bethel is home to KYKD, which is a radio station owned by Voice for Christ Ministries, which it also broadcasts in Aniak, Ambler, Kalskag, Hooper Bay, Quinhagak. Oh man, I hope I pronounced that right. Togiak. And they also have partner stations in Scammon Bay and St. Mary's. And I thought this was interesting because I have heard of this radio station. A friend of mine has done some flying for them. And on their website, they say, quote, "The programming and format of the station is oriented to the major culture of the Kuskokwim Delta, that of the Yupik people, who have inhabited the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region for thousands of years. The native culture of Norvik, however, is that of the Inupiat people, a distinct but related group. It is our desire that KYKD would be effective in bringing the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ to all people within this vast listening area, and thereby bring glory to God and advance his kingdom." So that is a radio station out of there. I have not tuned into it. I never really drove around where I had a car in Bethel. I've always flown in. Don't have a FM radio in my plane, but thought that was kind of neat. Bethel is home to many denominations of churches, including Bethel Covenant Church, which Adam London, who did the series on the history of the church in Alaska, he was the pastor there for, I think, 7 or 8 years, but he's now moving on to something else. So there's Bethel Covenant Church, Bethel Moravian Church, Bethel Seventh-day Adventist Church, Immaculate Conception Church, the Catholic Church, Bethel United Pentecostal Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons, Bethel Independent Baptist Church, Kuskokwim Community Church, which is Assemblies of God, Church of God, and St. Sophia Russian Orthodox Church, and the Bethel Korean Full Gospel Church. It is interesting that there is quite a large Korean community in Bethel. You wouldn't think, but there is quite a South Korean community there. So it is clear that Bethel has a strong church presence, and that the history goes back to the first Moravians who arrived on the banks of the Kuskokwim, likely with the feeling of isolation and uncertainty. This is something I have felt before myself, going into very remote villages in Mexico, being a white guy, going into an extremely remote village. There's like this feeling like, why am I here? And certainly these first Moravian missionaries who were the first to step out felt that way. However, there's some amazing stories that I've only like glinted the surface of, but they had significant help from the native community who really helped them feel welcome. Notably, there was a native shaman named Uyakok. He converted to follow Jesus, and he gave up his shamanism, and he became a pastor in the community, and he also became a literacy expert for the Yupik language. They say that he was it is like the most documented process of writing down an oral language, and this man played a key role in that. So really amazing stuff. So anyway, these are but the tip of the iceberg of the richness of the history there. Lots of fascinating stories as far as that goes out of Bethel. All right, I'm going to stop it here. Even though I've only scratched the surface of the story of Bethel, I feel like I'm missing out so much, but I'm trying to be more concise. Bethel, the hub village of the Kuskokwim Delta area in southwest Alaska. You know, the more I chip away at these stories, like one village at a time, sometimes I feel a little bit overwhelmed because it's showing me how much I don't know about this state and its history. But anyways, thank you for coming along on this ride with me of learning and pursuing that curiosity with me. So that's it for today. There's Belkofski and Bethel are now behind us. So soon I'm going to be going on a trip to the lower 48 to see some families for 10 days or so. So you will not hear from me next week. I'll be gone for a bit, but meanwhile, I will be preparing for the next 2 villages, which are Bettles and Big Delta. Bettles and Big Delta, the next B's on our list. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for going on this journey of curiosity with me. I'm hoping to continue to learn more about the state of Alaska.